And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you for spending some of this Friday evening drive here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, since today is Big Al, one of my all-time favorites and one of the unquestioned acting goats, it's Big Al's 85th birthday. And I started thinking about, well, what movie maybe could I talk about for his birthday, or as Al said in Scarface, talk what we got to talk about. I think he's talking to the F. Murray Abraham character. Donnie, we have to talk what we got to talk about. But I really don't like the movie Scarface. I've talked about Donnie Brasco. I've talked about Heat. I've discussed Sea of Love. Of course, we all know The Godfather. I'm not a huge fan of Serpico. It's kind of slow. So I'm going to talk about a massive guilty pleasure movie, one of my dear old dad's favorite cinematic junk food. He must have seen this movie a dozen times. It's so dumb, absurd, and Al seems to be channeling the sort of enormously broad acting performances of the 90s, such as Heat, such as Carlito's Way, and of course his Oscar-winning turn in Scent of a Woman. But the movie is not good. 22% on Rotten Tomatoes, but it has a slam bang cast, including Matthew McConaughey and the always fire Rene Russo. It is 2005's gambling, sports, fantasy, rotisserie, pick'em movie, Two for the Money. And man, the movie was not a box office hit, despite the strength of the cast. But Al shows, more so than either McConaughey or Rene Russo, they both play the material in a very straightforward fashion, as if this is serious, as if we're, not to get carried away, but as if this was going to be a good movie. Al, he knew that this was not a good script. He signed up to do it. He wanted to work with the two of them, but he knew that he was going to have to be very creative and inventive and channel those earlier performances, if we can admit, in far better movies. But he is absolute fire in this film, and he is a fucking riot again, giving that kind of performance where you never know what he's going to do or say. It adds to the kind of entertainment value, but also the fact that in the movie Heat, his character is very performative. He's always around people, and you just don't know, is this guy a showboat, or is he really as tough as he seems? Well, in the world of that movie, Vincent Hanna is a badass. He is not all show and no go, all talk and no action. He's the real deal. In the movie City Hall, Al's character is kind of a corrupt mayor. Were we not great once? Can we not be great again? I mean, epic line readings there. Carlito's Way, terrific movie with Sean Penn and Penelope Ann Miller and a young John Leguizamo, terrific. Scent of a Woman is a movie I like, I don't love, because I was pondering what films could I talk about, and some of the ones I just mentioned. But Two for the Money is so entertaining. It's a travesty that the that the Rotten Tomatoes score is 22%. Candyman, Farewell to the Flesh, that would be the 1995 semi-sequel to the masterpiece 1992 original. That's also 22%. That movie sucks. This movie is so much fun. I recommend anyone see it. I don't know anyone, non-critics who has seen Two for the Money who does not absolutely love it. And what I really appreciate, other than the fact that they give Al free rein to just go fucking crazy in this film, but they deploy Matthew McConaughey in a very smart way. Now, McConaughey is somebody where he came on the scene, and yeah, he's a really great-looking dude. He's got an incredible physique. He's super charming. And he made a lot of movies and has made a lot of movies where he played that. But what this film does, it sets him up in the same kind of way. He plays like a college quarterback, a little bit like a Keanu Reeves, Johnny Utah in Point Break a million years ago. It's a similar kind of setup. He was a college star who could have been, maybe had some pro potential, but he fucked up his knee. And then he becomes a kind of sports gambling, a tout expert, but he's not really that much of an expert, because how could you be an expert? You have some of the best at picking against the spread, and they go, 2-12 in a given week. There's no way to beat it consistently. But what this movie does with McConaughey, there are a couple of sequences that seem to be showing him and his character as John Anthony is the name that he goes by in the film. But it seems to be setting him up to be the typical super suave, because he certainly looks the part with the hair and again the build and the matinee idol good looks. And there's a scene relatively early in the film after he and Al have kind of joined forces, both, running this kind of, and it's not a scheme, it's above board. And you see it now in New York. There are people that I knew at Bev's gym that are heavy into, they're not necessarily gambling, but they're heavy into, I guess you could say, promoting sports betting. But in the world of this film, it's above board. Al Pacino might be kind of cutting corners and not giving Matthew McConaughey's John Anthony the correct or fair percentage, but it's a legitimate business. This is not like the Sting with underground gambling dens or even rounders, speaking of, illegal poker clubs. This is strictly above board. And there is a scene relatively early in the film, I'm pretty sure, where Matthew McConaughey seems to meet a female version of him, a really hot girl, and she's all over him. And it looks like, again, when you look like Henry Cavill or prime Matthew McConaughey or somebody of that ilk, young Denzel, it doesn't really matter. You know what I'm saying? The expectation is all you have to do is say, would you like to see me? And as surely as night follows day, the answer is yes, please. You tell me when, or some variation on that. So this movie sets that up. It sets up the kind of perfect guy. He hooks up with a hot girl, and then he more or less asks her out again, but he doesn't really ask her out. He says it in such a way that he knows that she's going to say yes. And when she not only rejects him, but points out, bro, I don't mean to be offensive, but your buddy paid me to do what we did, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It is a soul-crushing and a moment of pure emasculation. I give McConaughey credit because he could have stood on his head and said, I don't want my character looking like this much of a clown. I don't personally want to look like that much of a clown, but he goes with it, and it really works for the movie. Now, the problem with this sort of film, and speaking of Keanu, funny, I didn't think of this, speaking of the parallels between the character of Johnny Utah in Point Break and John Anthony, Matthew's character in this film, Keanu Reeves made a movie that got a lot better reviews than this one in the early 2000s. It was just before he started shooting Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions, which, in the immortal words of John Sterling, those two films were shot back to back and a belly to belly. Well, Keanu made a movie called Hardball, where he plays a compulsive / degenerate dead-end gambler who, in order to pay off a debt, I think it's his brother-in-law in the world of the film who bails him out, and he's really nice. It was the actor that had worked with Edward Burns in Brothers McMullen. I don't remember the name of the actor, but he's very distinctive looking, and he does him a favor. He helps him out of a terrible jam. He says, listen, you just have to coach my kids or my nephew's baseball team, whatever it is. And Keanu doesn't really have much choice. He's not great with kids. He doesn't want to do it, but he's got to do it because this guy helped him out. Now, the problem with that movie and this movie is when your main character is heavy into gambling, whether or not he is a compulsive, degenerate gambler, as Keanu's character is in Hardball, or somebody who is with his back against the wall needing to make a certain series of picks. Otherwise, everybody's fucked. There's too much left to chance. And that's a problem in the world of this film. It's one of the reasons why I feel like some critics marked it down, because it's difficult to argue that this is not an incredibly entertaining film. But Pacino's character bounces off the walls in almost every scene. Like, it's hard to believe that he and Rene Russo are a couple and have what appears to be a pretty good marriage, because his character is so unpredictable and so apparently batshit crazy, taking risks he doesn't need to, making wacky predictions he doesn't need to put himself potentially behind the 8 ball. But even with all of this, The football scenes in the world of the movie are pretty good. It's not easy to orchestrate that. We've seen in other movies, even with Oliver Stone, Any Given Sunday, there are all kinds of continuity errors. They try to, they do it. Speaking of Pacino, because he was in that movie, I forgot he played the head coach. And in an interesting cameo, a guy that I know all about and wrote a screenplay that should have been made into a movie, but the movie fell apart. Y.A. Tittle played one of the opposing coaches in Any Given Sunday, and that was a little bit of a wink and a nod to the fact that Oliver Stone was the first person to have his hands on that book that I ended up adapting. That's a whole other story and a whole other disaster. But Al's performance is really something to behold in this movie. And there's this one moment in the movie where we know that his character didn't exactly have the best childhood. It seemed like his father was a big drinker and used to kind of beat him around. And, you really shouldn't be making light of it or even making jokes about it. There's a moment in the film where Al is outside and he's carrying on, and I think because he's won a big game or they won a big bet, and he starts screaming and yelling and doing his Al Pacino thing. And one of the neighbors, like an upstairs neighbor, basically screamed, "Hey, shut the fuck up or I'll fucking kill you!" And Al, at the top of his lungs, yells, "Is that you, Dad?" Now, again, that's very inappropriate, making light of that kind of domestic abuse. But I gotta tell you, when I saw that movie for the first time and Al did that, I was screaming with laughter. I couldn't help myself. I'm ashamed to say, but it was a riot. So the movie does build to a pretty intense climactic game, and this doesn't seem like it's the sort of movie where you're going to have a quote-unquote climactic game, but because because Pacino and Matthews' characters are in this, they're in this sort of gambling, I don't even know if you call it a company, but Pacino is running this service. And when you think about it, if you put your money where your mouth is, in a sense of saying, I am guaranteeing this pick, right? If I am wrong, and there's all kinds of stuff, again, above board, where you're basically telling people, I will pay your bet off if I don't give you the winner here. So he is taking a potentially life-ending risk, a death of a salesman level. If this does not work out, if we don't win this game, it's all over but the song. And that's the similar issue to the movie, to the movie Hardball. The issue there is that Keanu's character is, his whole life depends on one team winning one game. And he has nothing to do with it. He has a series of bets, and if it doesn't work out, he's fucked. Any other characters, the Diane Lane character is probably screwed, and his brother-in-law is probably screwed too, because he's going to have to maybe spend more money to bail him out. These are the things that held the film back from getting the kinds of critical reception that you would expect from Al giving such an entertaining performance. And McConaughey, he doesn't do anything different. This is not Dallas Buyers Club Matthew McConaughey. And Renee Russo, I hate to say it, she's kind of wasted just she's playing a thankless role. And I often talk about how there are certain people, they take what could be thankless roles and make them memorable just because they're fantastic performers. But in the world of this film, it more or less really is a thankless role. And mild spoiler, there is a sequence that we know that McConaughey and Renee, they're not hooking up. But for reasons, and it's all sorts of goofy plot mechanics that aren't really necessary in a movie like this. You don't need a twisting plot. Give me a break. But there's a sequence where Pacino is supposed to believe that his buddy, his coworker, is going to, or is having an affair with his wife. And Al, in that moment, tries to do a little Donnie Brasco, where now suddenly he's quiet, he's meditative, he's melancholy. But we've seen this guy go nuts over stuff that's like nothing. But there is a moment in the movie, probably to me the scene that strains credibility the most, which to me is also another howler and why this is a guilty pleasure movie. So McConaughey's character figures out that Al is just not paying him enough, given given the work that he's done and how successful that he's been at picking, this is earlier in the film, at picking the winners, and bro, you're supposed to pay me 22%, whatever the number is. And Al is kind of poo-pooing it, and finally McConaughey is insistent enough where Al basically grabs him and tells him, you're not getting any more out of me than what I'm giving you now going forward, and that's final. And he says it in a very intimidating and threatening way, right? Now, the reality is, Matthew McConaughey, if this were real, if this guy were holding out and withholding thousands of dollars that he knows he's entitled to, he's picking up Al Pacino's character. He is stuffing him into a garbage can. He is closing the lid and he's putting a lock on it. He's not reacting the way that he does in the film. He's just not. So again, we go with it. It's funny. Al, again, having a meltdown and carrying on. And I guess we're supposed to believe that Matthew's character is so stunned that this guy is affronting him in this way. But again, give me a break, right? But the film does build to this really interesting climactic game. And it's the sort of movie where you're not really sure, are the good guys, quote unquote, going to win? Or is this going to be like a film that was made a few years, or maybe it was around the same time, a film called Even Money. It was with Danny DeVito and Kim Basinger, among others. And in that film, there are people at every side of gambling. There are people who are touting, you have to pick this, and don't pick that, whatever you do. Then there are people who are taking the bets, and sometimes dispassionately, they don't really give a shit who wins. The only time they're in trouble is if crazy prop bets or some kind of situation where a person puts $1 million on Buster Douglas to beat Mike Tyson in February of 1990, and now it's 70-1 and you owe 70 million. Some crazy shit. But that usually doesn't happen. It happens more in theory than in reality. But in the world of that film, there are too many different people who need too many different things, or they're going to be screwed. You know, sorry for spoilers, that is not going to have a happy ending. There's no pathway to a happy ending. But in the world of this film, the happy ending, if there is one, it's measured. It's measured from the perspective of the Al Pacino character, because he's a degenerate. He can't help himself. Whereas Matthew's character doesn't really need to do this. He likes the rush of it all, but he's not an addict. And Al, in addition to being a gambling and betting addict, he appears to be a bit of a danger addict, that he needs to do this for himself because he probably should be in rehab. You know, the movie doesn't make that argument that he should be in rehab, but, you know, he should be. Now, before I forget, Two for the Money is not free on streaming anywhere, as far as I can tell. It's on Amazon Prime, like usual, for a couple of bucks. Fandango at home, couple of bucks. Apple, same thing. And I know the movie was free on Amazon Prime the last time I watched it, which was a couple of years ago. It was free on Prime. So this is a sort of film, and some of them just sort of bounce around from service to service. Speaking of Rounders was on Netflix, then it was free with Prime, then it was back to Netflix, then it was on HBO Max, then it was on Paramount Plus, then it was Hulu, and then, you know, you say it's on all these services and now it's not free anywhere. That's the way it goes. Unless a film is specific to a studio and that studio has some kind of a run with, you know, like with Max, because if something is an HBO film, it's usually going to be available on Max. But Two for the Money is not a great Al Pacino performance. I mean, if I wanted to talk about Dog Day Afternoon, or what he does in, what was it called? Panic in Needle Park, or even a very interesting film he did with the late Gene Hackman, Scarecrow. But see, that's a film that so few people have seen, even with the big hitters, you know, multiple Oscar winner in the case of Gene. So few people have seen Scarecrow. I could sit here and talk about it. I could make up whatever I want, and you would have to go say that's not what the movie's about. I don't remember there being a scarecrow in the. Yeah. But if I'm asked, what are his best film performances? I mean, Godfather 1 and 2, Donnie Brasco, Dog Day Afternoon, you know, when he's screaming Attica, Attica. I just love his performance in Heat. Heat is an incredible film because the kind of broadness of his performance, when contrasted with how tight Bobby D, Mr. De Niro, how tight he is, it works. Because there are some movies, like some I've mentioned, especially Scent of a Woman, where Al is so big, so to speak, that, I don't know, it kind of takes away from the movie as a whole, I feel. But when it's a yin and yang, like in Heat, it works. And in the case of Two for the Money, McConaughey is capable of giving a broad and showy performance, but he doesn't do it. He looks the part, but it's a more focused and controlled acting job by Matthew. I mean, I got to be honest. I think he gives a better performance than either Pacino or Rene Russo, but Rene just doesn't have enough to do in this film. For somebody as versatile and resourceful as she is and has shown, especially in the Line of Fire, which I always say, hands down her best performance. She just doesn't have that much to do other than be the dutiful wife, putting up with this guy's shenanigans, presumably for a couple of decades. But a happy 85th birthday to a living legend and somebody who continues to work into his 80s. He's older than Dustin, he's younger than Dustin and Redford and Beatty and Hoffman, Redford and Beatty and Nicholson. I mentioned how those four guys are together. The two titans of Al's era are him and, and De Niro. And even though Harrison Ford is pretty much the same age as De Niro, he's not a thespian the manner of Al or De Niro, or the other guys if you go 5 years younger in Nicholson, Beatty, Redford, and Hoffman. So a happy 85th birthday to the one and only Al Pacino. And if you haven't seen Two for the Money, I highly recommend it. It's beyond ridiculous. It's overblown, overwrought, but it is magnificently entertaining from first frame to last. This has been episode 498 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Friday evening here with me in New York. If you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then, peace.